Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I am Durgesh and I am very happy to welcome you for today's session. We will be starting off with this short poll just to get an idea of what our audience is. So please fill this. I'll have this for like 30 seconds or maybe a minute. So the poll question are mainly about your application status. This is for all the students and postdocs. Is everybody able to see the poll?
I can see the poll, but I
Yeah.
don't think I'm allowed to go and fill in my details.
Likewise.
Okay, I'm getting some responses now.
We see the poll.
Okay, that's good. Okay, any more last responses? We got almost 2/3. Seems like most of the audience is postdocs and researchers. About 40% are graduate students. And most of them are going to apply in this coming cycle or the next year. Some are curious and have not made their mind yet. Okay, I thank you everybody. I'll end the poll now and we will start with our session. And I will bring out these results later, just when we have the Q&A. Okay, so first of all, I would like to introduce MIT Researchers and Postdoc Association in Aeronautics and Astronautics. So we are a newly formed group, about 2 years old. And this is a platform to represent the voice of postdocs and researchers in the Aeroastro department. And we have been organizing social events and also professional event and mentorship events. So I am Durgesh, I'm the president currently for this organization. And I also took this opportunity to share a little bit about other members from my team, Louise, Bong, and David. And definitely check out our website. The link is shown here. We keep posting our upcoming events, both social and professional events. And I have also shown the email address to contact us. So with that, let's move on to today's session. So today's session is mainly focused on giving you some useful tips and strategies on nailing your academic job search. We have a wonderful panel coming from varied educational background, cultural backgrounds, different kind of expertise. And so we have Dr. Jim Coder here today, who is an associate professor at the Penn State University. Dr. Daniel Pineda, who is an assistant professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio. We have Dr. Bianca Giovanardi. She is an assistant professor at the TU Delft, Technical University at Delft. And last but not the least, we have Dr. Elaine Petro. She is the assistant professor at Cornell University. So with this brief introduction, I will now give opportunity to each speaker to introduce a little bit more about themselves. And we will start with Dr. Jim Coder.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thanks. Thanks for the invite to be part of this panel. Happy to be able to share some of my experiences in the job market. I'm kind of not sure the everybody's background, but I've actually done 2 different job searches. So I'm on my second tenure line faculty position. I've got my PhD back in 2014 from Penn State, where I currently am. After I got my PhD, I spent 2 years at the Applied Research Lab here as non-tenure track faculty. The title then was called a research associate, but the people in the same positions are now called research assistant professors. So if you're looking for an equivalent to what that is today, in 2016, I went on the interview circuit. I put out applications, had a couple fly-out interviews, and got an offer from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville that I accepted. I spent the last 6 years there, working my way up to promotion and tenure before I took a new position back up here at Penn State as an associate professor. Just to give some background for relevant awards. As a grad student, I was an NDSEG fellow. That supported my the bulk of my PhD research. As a faculty member, I received various junior faculty research awards. I've won an AFOSR YIP project, which is the Young Investigator Program, to support my research in CFD, applied aerodynamics, and aerodynamic design. So next slide. I already covered a lot of this in what I said in the first slide, but I first applied in the 2015-2016 hiring cycle. In that cycle, I had 2 in-person interviews where I flew out to the school to do the in-person. Since the COVID, that has changed the landscape of that a lot more. A lot of schools are using Zoom interviews as their front line, and what used to be the phone interview is now being replaced with a Zoom interview. And I know some friends who have a 3-stage interview where they have the phone interview, a Zoom interview, and then a fly out if they advance that far. 2 in person. I declined the 3rd after I already accepted my offer at UT. My second job search was this past hiring cycle. I had multiple in-person interviews, including the one that I ended up accepting. I've interestingly never served on a search committee as a faculty member. I think I'm unique in that, and it's because my research load has been very heavy, and my department head is decided to spare me that time commitment. But I interact with whatever faculty candidates come to the department, because I like to know who my future coworkers may be. To give some top level thoughts on this before we really dive into this, is that if you already have a permanent position, I understand interviewing can be tricky. If you want some tips, feel free to reach out to me after the panel. Remember that this is a matchmaking process between you and the university. Is that qualifications are only one term in the equation. You have to be a match for them, and they have to be a match for you. One of my interviews in the past, I thought I knocked it out of the park, but interviewing them, I was like, this is not a place for me. And so it was a polite decline. Remember that universities don't make offers on a whim. This is a big investment for them too. So that gives you some leverage for negotiating, and you need to advocate strongly for the resources you need. And as you go through this, one of the biggest enemies that you'll face is imposter syndrome. So have faith in yourself as a researcher and as a future faculty member. So just overview of some flashy images from my research lab. I'm very research active. To date, as a faculty member, have been managing almost $18 million in external funding as PI and co-PI with a wide variety of sponsors. Last year at University of Tennessee, supported a very large research group, 10 grad students, 1.5 postdocs, 3 undergrad students. This year, because of the move and a lot of graduations at Tennessee, I'm down to a research group of size of 3, which is where I want it to be able to get everything spooled back up so I can give my attention to where it needs to go. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Coder. Dr. Pineda.
Hey, all right. So thank you for the introduction. So there's a lot of good points that Jim made, very specifically about the faculty job search being both a good fit for you and a good fit for the university. So I'll talk about that a little bit. But yeah, so I did my undergrad back in 2012 at UT Austin, and then I went to Berkeley for my PhD. I recognized that I wanted to be a professor sometime in the middle of my graduate studies when I was a TA, and I realized that I really liked mentoring and working with students. But my my CV was not where I needed it to be competitive on the faculty job market. And so I needed more papers, I needed more experience, particularly with all of there's a lot of administration that you have to deal with as a professor that you're shielded from when you're a graduate student. Usually a lot of red tape, a lot of procurement, all that stuff. So I pursued a postdoctoral position at UCLA for a while, and then I was on the job market every single year that I was a postdoc. I had an interview every year. And then in the third hiring cycle in 2020 is when I started to receive offers, and I accepted the position at UTSA, and I'm here in San Antonio. And my research areas are spectroscopy and laser-based diagnostics with specific application to combustion and rocket propulsion. But you can also use these things for environmental monitoring or, chemical kinetic analysis to monitor chemical systems. But I'll say that, there was the first time that I had an on-site interview, I was pretty excited about it, but during the course of that interview, I realized that like the position was not for me. And it's important to listen to your instincts when you are on the market, because you don't want to end up in a place that, is not going to be a good fit. And so, as Jim said, that'll happen sometimes. So just don't resist the urgency in taking a job unless you really want it. You are a qualified candidate. You will find a job. That's the other comment about imposter syndrome. You can't let that set in. I have been involved in faculty search committees for at least one hiring cycle. My other services to the university include being on safety committees because of my background as an experiment, my background in propulsion testing. I've mentored multiple senior capstone projects, and I've used that as a recruitment tool for graduate students, to join my group. And I'm also the faculty sponsor of the Rocket Club here on campus. So I've also used that as a recruitment tool to grow my research group. So so there's some photos of what I've been able to set up in my laboratory working with my students. There's a lot of gas and propellant handling. There's a lot of relief valves and safety considerations, but primarily my background is in combustion, which is a little bit of a tricky art to deal with because combustion as a whole is on kind of a decline, but it's still very relevant in aerospace. But remove all the major automakers have committed to electric vehicles, and California just bans the sale of gasoline cars after 2035. So it's definitely an interesting funding landscape, but there's a lot of relevance in aerospace and rockets. My group is pretty, it's where I want it to be. I wanted to grow it a little bit more, but I'm trying not to take on too much because that is, I'm also trying to keep my sanity. The first 2 years of being an assistant professor are the hardest. So I've got 2 PhD students, about 4 MS students, 4 undergraduates who are consistently showing up in the lab. I try to give everybody an opportunity, but over time, whoever ends up showing up the most is who gets the most benefit. The teaching load is something that is gonna, we haven't touched on yet, but is gonna be a topic at different universities that you go to. Universities are gonna have different expectations about how many classes that you're gonna be expected to teach. UTSA has 2-1, so 3 classes per year is the nominal teaching load, but usually they give you a relief for your first few years. So for example, my first year, I was only asked to teach 1 class. My second year, I was only asked to teach 2 classes. And now in my third year, I'm teaching 3 classes per year. Obviously, this for schools that are on the quarter system, this is a much easier to balance because you have 3 quarters that are not the summer, and you can have 1 class per quarter, and you can have like a regular schedule. But when you're on the semester system, you have to plan ahead and do a bunch of other things to balance your research load accordingly. So I've taught undergraduate classes. I'm teaching one right now, graduate classes, and then what we call electives at UTSA, although we're trying to grow our aerospace program to have our own degree plan there. And I've got collaborators at the Air Force Research Lab, particularly Edwards, where it's related to rocket propulsion, NASA Marshall. My old group at UCLA, I still frequently collaborate with my old PI. It's important to branch out though, so that you can demonstrate that you're an independent researcher. I've actually got a project with Durgesh that we recently, a planning grant that we won. So MIT is a collaborator. Worcester Polytechnic Institute, I do some fire protection engineering stuff, and then as well as industry. So yeah, that's kind of what I've got going on, and I'm happy. The faculty search is fresh on my mind, so I'm ready to answer questions about it.
Thank you for the great insight. Dr. Bianca Giovanardi.
Yeah, I go ahead. Thanks. Thank you very much for having me in this panel. All right, so I'll start with my path. I did my bachelor, master, PhD in computational science and engineering at Politecnico di Milano in Italy. So that's an easy, like, first line, everything in one shot. And then during my PhD, I won a Rocca Fellowship that allowed me to do a 6-month period of research at MIT Aerospace. And that is how I got at MIT. And after my PhD, I did a postdoc in the same group. And after my postdoc, like during my postdoc, I have applied like already like 2 years in my postdoc, and then a second time, 3 years in my postdoc. So let's jump to the job market then. So I did, like I said, like 2 shots. The first shot that I took, like I was completely unprepared. I had no idea what I was going to go through. I had no idea like how to write a research statement, how to like answer some of the questions that they are going to ask like at the interview, like 100% sure. So I just saw like this open position. I said, oh, well, I will just send my application and sent it. And then I had the interview. And it was not a fly out. It was one of the person in the committee. He like just happened to be in Boston. And so it was like, oh, let's meet up for coffee. But it was actually an interview because he was asking all kind of interview questions. So I meet this person and he starts asking questions like, oh, if you got like $5 million of funding, what do you do with that? And I was like, I have honestly no idea. So I of course, it didn't go well. It was really a bad experience, but that taught me like to be prepared. So then in my second shot, I was very organized. I had worked on my research statement for more than 1 year. After that, I had the chance to like write it, rewrite it, gather feedback from other people, really make sure that like my contributions would come across, that my vision of research would come across. And that time, I sent 25 applications, so a huge number, if you ask me. And I got 5 like Zoom interviews. And actually, I was on the job market during COVID. So that was very unfortunate because the minute that like my advisor of the post was like, oh, 5 interviews and counting. Like that very day, interviews started to be canceled because flying was not possible, and like some faculties didn't want to hire anymore. And so like, yeah, I did 5 interviews on Zoom, 2 flyouts, and then I was the top candidate in 2 places. My research interests are in high performance computing, high performance computational modeling, mostly focused on the design of aerospace structures, soft materials and architected materials. So yeah, next, I just wanted to really make sure that I emphasize that you need to be very well prepared. And by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. That one I learned on my own skin. So my group right now, I'm almost 2 years in my professorship. I have 2 graduate students, PhD students, one who started with me and another one who we're actually hiring right now. So if you want to send out like your CV, it's a very cool project. Just reach out to me in case. And I have 2 graduate students doing my master and 1 undergraduate intern. The courses I teach are continuum mechanics and a new course that I'm preparing with some colleagues on artificial intelligence for aerospace engineering. My advice on courses is actually 2 things, if I have time to cover that. And I'm looking at the sketch. Yeah, okay. So one is like graduate courses are much better to teach than undergraduate courses. You get to teach the topic that is closer to what you do in your research. And that gives you a lot of visibility, for like students pursuing a master. Actually, this is something like more European. In Europe, students enroll in a master course, and then they choose like a professor to do the master thesis with. So having visibility in the graduate courses is really very important. And the second thing about courses is that make sure that you know well in advance which course you're going to teach, like when you accept your offer, which gives you like more time to prepare and again, more visibility with the graduate students. So my collaborations are mostly with other departments of TU Delft. MIT Aerospace and Politecnico di Milano, and I've recently got funded a project with the US AEFOSR, which is going to be very much fun to do. And I guess that's it from my end.
Thank you, Bianca. Dr. Petro.
Can you see my desktop now?
Yes.
Yes.
And you can see my slide?
Yeah.
Okay, great. It's great to be here and to be at an RPA Cubed event. So thank you so much for hosting this and inviting us. Let's see, I'll just go through kind of the same background, the same information that everyone else covered. I got all of my degrees in aerospace engineering from the same University of Maryland. And part of that was like family situations. So that's always kind of a factor, I think, for a lot of us. I got my PhD in 2019, and between undergraduate and my PhD, I worked at NASA Goddard. And then towards the end of my PhD, I came to MIT as a visiting researcher, and I stayed in the same lab as a postdoc. That was a really good experience. My research is in electric propulsion for spacecraft. So these are plasma-based propulsion systems. For that reason, my research is really plasma science applied to propulsion systems, and then a little bit into space systems as well. So kind of looking at the bigger architecture of, what the spacecraft wants out of the propulsion system to guide like the design and the research. My collaborators, that's been like a big change between being a faculty and a graduate student or as a postdoc. As a graduate student, I kind of just worked with my lab and had a kind of a small network. But that changes like exponentially fast when you're a professor, my experience. So now I have collaborators at NASA, a couple different centers, those who are interested in electric propulsion. And I have also some space science collaborations with JPL. AFRL has been really the big sponsor for propulsion system development. So NASA will do some, investigations here or there, but most of the funding for development comes from places like the Air Force. So we're working with them, and they have a lot of interest in the basic science as well. We still work with our former lab at MIT. We just gave a presentation to NASA with them last week on an internal or a collaborative grant. And then Cornell has been fantastic for building collaborators in different disciplines. So I don't know, this is the only university that I've been at, but I've just been really surprised by one, like how much people go out of their way to reach out to me to meet and think about research collaborations, and then two, just even if I want to reach out to somebody, how amenable they are and how easy and successful that has been. So yeah, my current job, I'm in year 3 or starting year 3 in an assistant tenure track professor role in a mechanical and aerospace engineering department. So my department's quite broad. We have biomechanics, we have robotics. We also have a cohort of us who do, specifically space technology research. I can talk more about the applications maybe later. One thing I really like about Cornell, if you're building a research lab, is we have just 1 course per semester teaching load, but they have, I guess, high expectations for us for the teaching quality as well. But it's hard. It's still really hard to balance teaching with research, even with that load. So I really admire everyone who has a higher teaching load than that. So far in my group, I have 2 PhD students. This year I have the first postdoc. I've had a lot of undergraduates, which we could talk more about the pros and cons of that. And quite a few MEng students, which is, a degree we have at Cornell that is, I hadn't had exposure to other places. I just have the slide with the pictures. I put these 2 pictures in the top left of my daughter, who was born 3 weeks ago. So this is my first week kind of doing my job again, and made it hard to get these slides together for you ahead of time. And so I could talk more about what I'm learning about being a faculty and a parent at the same time. Of course, I'm very new to it, but I've been thinking about my strategy for a while. A couple pictures from things I'm involved in at Cornell. So the biggest thing obviously is directing a research group. So my lab is called Astrolab, which is an acronym for basically transportation and architectures. So I wanted to be more than just a propulsion lab, or at least leave it open. This is one of my PhD students, Carl. I thought he looks really happy in this picture, so that made me happy. This is we do experiments and we do simulation work as well. Speaking of like collaboration, one thing that the like collaborative environment has really enabled me to do is start this small sat mission design school. So this is a collaboration between 3 faculty in engineering and 3 in astronomy. And we've been running this for 2 years over the summer, and we do like a mission design concept with the science and the engineering. And we've opened it over the last year to be recruiting from other universities to come to Cornell over the summer. And then something I've been involved in since I was a graduate student was starting a National Women of Aeronautics and Astronautics Association. And there was not one at Cornell before I moved there. So I started a chapter there, and these are the students. So yeah, I think I'll stop there, and we can move on.
Lynn, that was wonderful. And congratulations on your next phase of this life.
Thank you.
Thanks to all these speakers. You already shared a lot of like inspirational and informational content. So I will now go into the question and answer session. I will request our audience to raise their hands and put their questions in chat. In the meantime, I am going to start with some questions which I have already thought of. So that will give everybody time to think their own questions. And also in the beginning of the session, we had launched a survey. So I am relaunching it briefly just to include the people who were not there in the beginning. So please fill out your responses. And in the meantime, we will start with the question and answer session. So, okay. Okay, so as all of you mentioned about being a new faculty member or slightly experienced in case of Dr. Coder, the first question which came in my mind is like, why did you want to specifically target on R1 institution? Why not something else? And why being a professor? Why not some other profession? Because like being a professor is really a lifelong career. So if one of you or maybe 2 of you can briefly touch on that.
So I can start. So I originally so UTSA when I joined was not R1. It was R2. And but I've worked at R1 institutions, and I wanted to, I enjoy research, but I also enjoy teaching. And there's, it's a one type of profession where you get to do both. You get to mentor students, you get to shepherd them through the research process, but you also get to be involved in research yourself. That being said, there's a lot, like I mentioned before, there's a lot of administrative stuff that comes along with that. So you have to be willing to deal with that. I joined UTSA because I could, they were growing pretty rapidly, and I could tell where the trajectory was headed. And now we're R1, and it feels good to be a part of something that's growing pretty rapidly. So that's my take, just qualification there. I'm sure other people have similar reasons, but they might be a little different.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone would like to add briefly or?
Yeah, I guess my reasons are very similar to Daniel's. I really enjoy teaching. I like to see my students learning new stuff. I find it very exciting. And I really enjoy doing research. I want to set my own goals, and I want to be able to, if tomorrow I'm interested in some new topic, to just pick it up, like read papers, put a student on it, and see what I get from it. So I really like the freedom of the job.
Thank you. So the next question was about like when exactly did you think or decide that I want to be a professor? And then once you were clear, how did you align your research, leadership, and networking activities so that you are more prepared for that goal? Perhaps we can start with Dr. Coder.
So I started thinking about being a professor. It wasn't quite on my radar when I was a grad student. I thought I was going to be on a path to industry, and then I ended up working. Circumstances led me to the applied research lab. The company I was going to go work for completely restructured, and I'd have been quick to be laid off in that restructuring, so I decided to take another option. As non-tenure track faculty, I was on soft money, so any research that I did and brought in, I had to cover my salary first before thinking about even hiring a grad student. I realized I really like the advising grad students part of that, and that's what really put me down on that path. The research, leadership, and networking, a lot of that's just doing what you do. You're in this field because you're passionate about something. Hopefully you're the best at something. And so you're going to go out, you're going to go to conferences, you're going to talk to the people that you know, try to connect, especially with the more senior people in the field, especially those who do what you want to do. Try to get that insight into how they think, get involved in professional organizations with the leadership. I'm very active in AIAA. I'm consider myself an aerodynamicist first, a computationalist second. I'm currently the chair of the Applied Aerodynamics Technical Committee. I've been a member of that committee since 2016, before I was tenure track faculty. So it's getting yourself out there and into those professional situations.
Thank you. That was great to learn. Anybody else would like to add?
I can add a little bit. I decided when I was working in industry, both to go back to graduate school to get a PhD, and that I was interested in being a professor. And I think for the same reasons that a lot of people have others, my colleagues have shared about the benefits of the job. I really wanted a job that had the freedom, the intellectual challenge of doing research and always working on something new, and the working with students, so like the personal and the like social aspects of it in that way. And then I guess one thing that I did, which I guess is advice for graduate students or even postdocs, is it's so much, right, to build up like these different aspects of your resume. So what I kind of did was like one thing every year in the PhD. So, like a lot of, you're always kind of doing research, but you might like do things that are like, bolster your research section of your resume, and then definitely do something like teaching related, and do something maybe service related if you enjoy it, like something that you're passionate about. And then, but you don't have to do them all at the same time. So for me, I always kind of like, if I was like leading an organization, like I would do that 1 year, but then step back and like kind of focus on something else. And I think you could do that as a postdoc as well. But as a postdoc, maybe you have a little extra time, so you could probably, double up.
Okay, thank you. So we have started getting some questions from audience, so we will go to that. I still have some question on my own. So there is a question in the chat from Annie Jang. They say, what's the biggest factors you considered when choosing which university and faculty to apply for?
Good. Can I start on that? So this is one that I've put a lot of thought. I had to put a lot of thought into for both of my job searches. For my first job search, I was mostly interested in becoming a professor at a school where I could see having a solid trajectory. having collaborators, having a department that's supported by the university. Location mattered too. You don't always know the full story about a place until you get there. With my second job search, I was looking for I was in a combined aeromechanical biomedical department at Tennessee. I was looking for a larger purely aero department in an area really with good public schools. I have a son who's almost 9. So that was something that mattered, is there were some good schools, but then you weigh the options on the what's the quality of the public schools versus the cost of the private schools, and that enters into the equation as well. But having the support and the collaborators are the biggest things from the school itself that I looked for when I was looking for places to apply. And ranking tends to come along with it. Rankings come and go. If you're at a higher ranked school, you will have better access to graduate students compared to a lower ranked school. Just an unfortunate reality of academia.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Priyanka, would you like to add something?
Yeah, definitely. I was actually going to unmute myself. So for me, I was really looking for a university in which they were very interested in like computational aspects, in my case, computational mechanics. That was very important because, as Daniel and Jim also said before, it's a two-way fit, right? That needs to be the place in which where you are happy to go and like happy to work, and that you see that your colleagues, that you are valued by your colleagues for who you are. So that was one of the biggest things that I had to keep in mind. And second, I considered only, maybe this may look trivial, but only places in which I would like to go, like to move and live. The geographical position of the university is clearly very important. So if you already know that you wouldn't enjoy going to live where the university is, it really makes no sense to apply. It would be a waste of time for you and for the community.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go to next question from Lee Strobel. They say, in your opinion, what are the pros and cons of being a faculty member over being a research scientist? Maybe we can start with Dr. Petro.
I was looking at this question and I was thinking, I've never been a research scientist, so I couldn't say. Okay. But I guess I'll just say the things that I imagine are different. So like I would say cons, right, are like you are kind of, your lab is a self-contained like research entity. So like you're kind of, you're the CEO, whatever role you want to have of that lab, and you have to bring in the funding and you completely manage everything. And you can probably manage, smaller, at least that's how it is for me at Cornell. You could probably manage like your group as a research scientist, but I envision you're part of this like larger research enterprise where, you have this kind of structure around you. But for us, we have to like build and maintain all of the structure as a research lab. So I would say that's kind of a con. For me, it's just like, it's a lot, and people talk about the bureaucratic parts and everything. So you have to manage that or find a way to delegate it. And then I would say the first thing that comes to me is like the teaching, which is really rewarding and intellectually stimulating, because you learn something every time you teach your course, or you learn a lot every time you teach it. And then working with the students, I would imagine like maybe you work with students to some capacity as a research scientist, but not nearly to the same extent, I would guess.
Mm-hmm.
Which could be a pro or a con, I guess. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone wants to add something?
I'll add some cons to being a faculty member over being a research scientist. So I'm an experimentalist, and so I've got, I picked up most of my training like in the laboratory and working with the experiments and with things. And then as a professor, you rarely spend time in the lab. And it's mostly the students that you're training on how to use the equipment and how to design the experiments and how to approach everything. So if you know, if you're someone and you tell yourself like, I really like doing the research, the mindset has to shift to be like, I really like planning the research, because the students are going to be the ones doing the research. And that's something that you have to let go of at some point. So yeah, that is a con that I would say, if you are someone for whom that is true.
Okay, thank you. So before we move to our next question from the audience, I have one question on my own. So based on my experience, I have observed that one of the main component of your application is the research statement and what your research vision is. Like, you know, mostly your selection is dependent on that. So how did you develop your research vision? And like, these are the things I want to work on. And then it's also kind of like a vision for next 5 to 10 years. So how did you develop that? What activities did you do to be knowledgeable enough to be in a position to prepare a good, you know, vision? And I would really appreciate a brief response from all of you on this.
I guess I can give a brief response. I would say, oh gosh, I mean, just building off of your current research, you know, like the next questions that you think you want to answer, and then I would have some short-term goals that you think are easily accomplishable, and then some like stretch goals that show like the vision of what your program could grow into. And like, I feel like it's hard as a PhD student or postdoc to kind of like allow yourself to think that broadly, but I think it'll pay off in the you know, if you can like have the courage to, you know, you can say whatever you want during your interview, and nobody's going to hold you to like following through on those things. So you just want to, you know, say things that you know are reasonable, but also like would be like a stretch. And then something I thought that was also helpful is to think about who your sponsors would be for your research. And you could talk to like your PI or other people if you need help thinking about that, or kind of get an idea for where if you're currently in a research lab as a postdoc or a graduate student, where the funding comes from. Probably you're applying for some of the same funding agencies. So you would like, for me during my search, it was good to be able to say like, I want to do this research project and here's who would sponsor it.
Thank you.
I have a couple thoughts as well. I'm going to echo the what Elaine said, and I phrase it as near-term, mid-term, and far-term goals for your research portfolio. So something that's realistic, that what proposals are you going to write tomorrow as soon as you get the thumbs up to be a PI at your new institution, but also have that vision, not really in the concrete of what you want your research to be doing, but how you see your research making the world a better place. That's one of the factors that a lot of search committees look for, is that impact of your research, not just fundability. Because regular research scientists on soft money is fundable, but where's that vision that a professor is going to lead? What are the superlatives associated with that research? And I do recommend talking with your PhD advisor about where you see yourself going, and see if they can help guide some activities to boost those superlatives. What are you going to be the best at? What are you going to be the smartest person in the room doing as a faculty member? And if you have younger members in your lab who are thinking about faculty track, encourage them to have those conversations sooner rather than later with your advisors.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that point about fundability and impact. That's very important. Bianca, would you like to add?
Yeah, definitely. So I think you should think about like, what are the big challenges like in your field? How can you help with research solving them? But like, in addition, like to the content, I think it is very important, like how the research statement is written. because you need to be to keep in mind that like the committee that's gonna read it, they are like, not everyone will be an expert of your field. And so the thing that I see many times is like research statements that are way too technical for people to understand them. My suggestion there is like to like discuss like the goals at like high level, and then maybe sprinkle it like in a couple of sentences, maybe one paragraph that goes a little bit more in detail, so that like you make the people who are technical in your field understand the details, but like still everyone would gather the vision behind it. I think that is very important.
Thank you.
I have
Dr.
two.
Schneider?
Yeah, I've got two recommendations. One, I think I thoroughly researched each institution to which I applied, and I figured out, okay, what is the local economy like in that place? What are the other major players in industry? Or so, for example, San Antonio, there's a large healthcare presence, and there's also, there's some, emerging aerospace industries nearby, as well as longstanding ones. And so I specifically mentioned those, like in my research statement, that like, I want to extend, collaborations and connections between your university and then these other institutions or entities that are in the same geographical area. That shows a lot of thought in terms of like, oh, this person is looking at our institution and it's not just another, application that's going to a bunch of different places. The second thing is that I would identify specific, in the same context, I would identify specific faculty members that you say like, oh, I could work, potential collaborators for this research thrust include, and you look at the faculty web pages and you see like, all right, who would be most likely that I could collaborate with? And it depends on the institution, because a lot of them, some of them may emphasize collaboration more than others. I get the high ranked institutions want to see you succeed individually, but it does show some thought into the application and an attempt to really fit in with the department. So I think that goes a long way.
Thank you.
If I can also add something, which I just thought, another advice I think is like, do not push in your research statements things that you're not like sincerely interested in doing. So to some extent, you are definitely most likely are not going to do what's written in your research statement. Because then, yeah, life happens and you start working on things as the funding comes and so on. But still, it needs to like give an overview of what you're really interested in working on. And it's really important that you are true to yourself, and also that you don't lie in your research statement, because you want the people who hire you, you want them to hire you because you're you and they like you the way you are, and not pretending to like some other kind of research that you don't like.
Yeah, that's a great advice. Okay, I have another question in chat from Long Fei. They say, which is more important between preparing application materials versus preparing interviews? Should we put a lot of time to polish the materials?
1000%. Like you need the application to be good to get the interview. Like, and you're going to send out way more applications than you receive interviews. And so good applications will help with that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, these are very competitive positions, and in any type of competitive job market, is the search committee in their initial screening will be looking for any reason to throw out an application. Don't give them that reason to throw out your application. So if you have poor formatting, poor readability, a lot of typos, then that's going to be strongly to your disadvantage. So polish them well.
Yeah, I mean, I had an interview that I was on the market, and that was an area where I was not as polished, but every year I got better at the interview process. So I knew that I'd nailed down the application, but it was the interview that I had to work on. And so, get to that stage as fast as you can.
Okay, so talking about that, I have one more question. So, so some of you have already served in faculty hiring committees. So, like, if you would like to summarize, what are the main components which faculty hiring committees are looking for, especially in R1 institutions? And then, like, what can make an application stand out in crowd? And probably you can give also some tips about like research statement, diversity statement, and teaching statements.
I guess I've served on 2 search committees so far. But they were both kind of in the same area. So I guess I could speak from my perspective, but I would also guess just from my experience that it varies. So like it varies based on the people that are on the search committee and the department, like what they're looking for. So sometimes they might be looking for something really specific, and it's something that like I tell maybe graduate students or anyone in academia, like there are many people that are like deserving of an opportunity. Like we are all deserving of a lot of opportunities that we don't get. So I would say a lot of times, like there are really great people who interview for our job, and because of like what's behind the scenes, um, you might not get it, and that might not, there may be no way to know, right? Like you might not move from one stage to the next because of like what's happening behind the scenes, not because of your qualifications, which I think goes back to like the two-way fit thing that people have mentioned. And so yeah, what search committees are looking for, it may be to replace someone specific who has left, it may be to grow in a certain area, which I think is common in aerospace right now. We are lucky that like our industry is growing and our departments are growing. So a lot of times I think we will have opportunities just to bring in something like new and bring in, help support these like growing enrollments of students in aerospace engineering or related fields. And then one other thing I will say about the search committee is there's like power dynamics in the search committee. So I've served on the search committee as a assistant professor, and so I have like the lowest in the totem pole. So I think, it may not even be the whole committee's opinion, but it may be even the department chair who ultimately makes the decision, even though there's a committee who does a lot of the work. So I don't know how helpful that is, but just, I guess, just know that there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and I don't know how much you can get insight into that.
Yeah, sometimes it doesn't stop there. Sometimes, the dean or the provost is gonna have an opinion on how things go. And then as an assistant professor, like you said, it's like, all right, well, there's not much I can do about this, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of personalities and sometimes professional agendas that come through. So don't take a rejection personally in this process. I've seen ones where, it wasn't on the search committee, where it's basically 60-40 between two candidates, and the department chair took that as well. That means the candidate that I like, the 40% one, is viable, so I'm going to make the offer to that person. I've seen search committees take the approach of where each member picks their champion for an in-person interview, and questionable results for that. And I've seen ones where they bring in candidates and you see the list of people. You don't even have to hear their seminar, but you look at certain indicators from their CV. You're like, yep, that's the person that's going to get the offer. And sure enough, so you don't know until you've done it. It sounds jaded, but it's it's a reality check.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So the lesson is that don't take the rejection personally. That gives everybody applying here some hope that it's not 100% because of they're not qualified. There are other factors. Okay, we are nearing the end of the hour. I'll just ask one last question. So there are like when we apply for the faculty position, there are several factors which have to be prepared of. Like in the poll, I have one of the questions on what do you find as the most challenging part of academic job search process? And I lost some of the previous results, but most of the people were scared about preparing the application package, and the second highest has been preparing the chalk talk. So if one of you can share about what was the most scaring part for you and how did you prepare for that?
I guess I started by assembling a few conference presentations together, and then over time I realized that what people were really looking for was like a research vision. And you hone it over time to figure out, you know, what it's not just another conference presentation. It's like, I need to bookend it with like these big overarching themes. I need to be able to communicate, like, how well am I going to be able to teach a class to people who don't understand, you know, my technical area. That's one aspect that I'll.
Okay.
One piece of advice I would give for that is, you know, seeing candidates give chalk talks and having given one or just working in this area. You're presenting to people who don't know the details of your research or your field. I'm sure that's going to be true no matter what department you're talking to. So really, yeah, you need to communicate with them in a way that shows like what you're doing is impactful. And so you want to highlight like how you're advancing the state of the art, but without kind of going into the details of your methods or what the state of the art is. So it's kind of a tricky thing to do, especially as a graduate student, you're like, or postdoc, you're so in the technical details. And one thing that might help is if it might be awkward. I would have found it awkward to ask my advisors to like look at my slides or look at my talk, because I would be afraid that they'd be like, you know, you're sharing these ideas that are maybe competitive with theirs or building off of their research in different ways. So I would maybe, if I were going back and doing it again, I would ask a faculty member who is not my PI to go through what I prepared.
Okay, and just to end this discussion, there was one question about like if you want to apply for a faculty position in a certain university, shall you try to give talks at that school before applying so that people know you better? Is it a good idea or bad?
I don't see how it could be a bad idea. I think like the more people, so imagine like you gave a seminar and it was a very good seminar, and then your applications end up on the table and the committee is evaluating it and they're thinking, oh, it rings the bell, I know this person already. So it's definitely good if your seminar is good, of course.
It gives you a chance to practice too.
Oh yeah, that too.
I'm gonna amend that a little bit. If you're a PhD student and you're getting asked to give a seminar at another school, it's not just a seminar. You give it the full attention you would to your interview talk, because they're trying to see if you might be someone worth making an expedited offer towards, especially if it's coming in the fall timeframe. So seminar is not always just a seminar.
Okay, that's good to know. So we will all be prepared. Hopefully, most of the audience here is interested in applying. So I hope today's session was useful for everybody. And now we are over time, so we will be concluding the session. Thank you everybody for joining. Thanks all the speakers for like dedicating your time and efforts to make this happen. And we really appreciate all the insights and advice you have shared with us. And hopefully we can reach out to you if anybody needs any more suggestions.
Sure, feel free. Thank you all very much. Thank you, guys. This was a very nice event, like always. Yeah.
I'm putting my email in the chat if anybody has questions for me, because we all have different experiences on this. So feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to answer any question you have.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
Yes.
good